In the year 897, a bizarre trial was held in Rome. The defendant stood accused of perjury, violating sacred law, and clawing his way to power through raw ambition. But the man on trial wasn't just silent. He had been dead for 9 months. This is the story of the Cadaver Synod, one of the most grotesque events in the history of the Catholic Church. An event where a reigning pope ordered the rotting corpse of his predecessor to be dug up from its grave, dressed in sacred robes, and propped up on a throne to stand trial. The spectacle that followed was a macabre circus of vengeance and political theater that would shake the very foundations of the papacy. What could possibly drive a holy man, a vicar of Christ, to commit such a profane act? The answer isn't a simple tale of madness. It's a dark story about brutal power struggles, deep-seated corruption, and the violent ambition that had taken hold of the medieval church. Section 1. A Throne of Chaos. To understand how a dead man ended up on trial, you first need to understand the world he lived and died in. The late 9th century in Rome wasn't a time of holy reverence and quiet prayer. It was an age of chaos, a period so dark and violent it would later be known as the Saeculum Obscurum, the Dark Age of the Papacy. The great empire of Charlemagne had shattered, leaving Italy a fractured landscape of warring dukes and ambitious aristocrats, all hungry for power. And the biggest prize of all was the papacy itself. You see, the papal throne wasn't just a spiritual office. It was a seat of immense political and financial power. It held the authority to crown emperors, legitimize rulers, and control huge territories. So it became a pawn in the vicious games played by Italy's most powerful families, especially the power-hungry Duchy of Spoleto. These families didn't pray for a pious pope. They plotted to install one of their own. The result was a revolving door of popes whose reigns were often nasty, brutish, and short. During this era, dozens of popes would wear the papal tiara, and a shocking number of them would meet violent ends, either through assassination, suspicious illness, or imprisonment. This wasn't a church. It was a battlefield. Popes weren't just shepherds of a flock. They were political players who needed military protection and powerful allies just to survive. They made deals, broke promises, and navigated a world where a rival's dagger was a more immediate threat than divine judgment. This was the treacherous world that created Pope Formosus, and it was the world that would ultimately desecrate his memory. Section 2. The Pope and his enemies. Pope Formosus himself was no saintly outsider. He was a seasoned and ambitious player in the dangerous game of Roman politics. Before becoming pope in 891, he'd had a long and controversial career that earned him a host of powerful enemies. Their biggest problem with him? His political loyalties? The Spoletan faction, the dominant power in central Italy, was determined to control the papacy and, through it, the crown of the Holy Roman Emperor. They had their own candidate, Lambert of Spoleto, and they expected the Pope to fall in line. But Formosus had other plans. Wary of the Spoletans' immense power, he looked for an alternative. He found one in Arnulf of Carinthia, a German king and descendant of Charlemagne. Formosus saw Arnulf as a powerful counterweight to the Spoletans, and in a move of open defiance, crowned Arnulf as Holy Roman Emperor. To the Spoletan faction, this was an unforgivable betrayal. They had been outmaneuvered, their imperial ambitions thwarted by a pope they couldn't control. Formosus had essentially signed his own death warrant, though he wouldn't pay the price until after he was in his grave. When Formosus died in 896, the stage was set for revenge. After a brief interlude, the papal throne was seized by a man named Stephen VI, a staunch ally of the Spoletan faction and a bitter enemy of the deceased Formosus. Stephen was the perfect tool for the Spoletans' vengeance. The trial of Formosus's corpse was, at its core, a brutal political power play. If Stephen could prove that Formosus was an illegitimate pope, then every official act he ever performed would be nullified. That included ordinations, decrees, and, most importantly, the coronation of Emperor Arnulf. By erasing Formosus's papacy, Stephen and his Spolitan masters could erase Arnulf's claim to the imperial throne and clear the way for their own candidate, Lambert. But Stephen's motives may have been even darker and more personal. There was a glaring hypocrisy at the heart of his crusade. One of the main charges he would level was that Formosus had violated canon law by transferring from one bishopric to another, the papacy. This was, indeed, against the rules at the time. But Stephen himself was guilty of the exact same crime. Formosus had appointed Stephen as a bishop, a position Stephen held when he became pope. By declaring Formosus an anti-pope and nullifying all his acts, Stephen may have been attempting a bizarre legal maneuver to erase his own sin by destroying the man who had elevated him. Compounding all this, some historians speculate that Stephen VI may not have been mentally stable. A volatile mind, immense political pressure, and a burning grudge created the perfect storm for one of history's most macabre spectacles. Section 3. The Trial of the Dead. In January of 897, Pope Stephen VI gave the order. The tomb of Formosus was broken open and his corpse, buried for 9 agonizing months, was exhumed. What was dragged from the earth was barely the image of a pontiff, but a testament to decay. The body was in an advanced state of decomposition, leaving a skeletal figure clinging to its last vestiges of humanity. But Stephen's theater demanded a leading man. He ordered the gruesome remains to be dressed in the full, splendid vestments of the papacy, the very robes Formosus had worn in life. The rotting corpse was then carried into the Basilica of St. John Lateran, the mother church of Rome, and propped upright on a throne. The fragile body had to be physically held in place by guards to stop it from slumping into a heap of bones and cloth. To complete this grotesque parody of justice, a young deacon, trembling with fear, was appointed to act as defense counsel for the deceased. He was tasked with the terrifying job of speaking for a corpse, answering the furious charges of a living pope. The trial began. Pope Stephen VI did not preside with dignity. He paced before the silent defendant, screaming accusations directly at the rotting head of Formosus, his rage echoing through the basilica. The chronicler Liutprand of Cremona captured the terrifying scene, quoting Stephen's furious demand, "When you were Bishop of Porto, why did you usurp the universal Roman see in such a spirit of ambition?" The charges were a litany of ecclesiastical crimes designed to ensure a guilty verdict. Formosus was accused of perjury, of violating church canons, and of unholy ambition. The young deacon, standing beside the corpse, could offer only meek, terrified responses, his words swallowed by the force of Stephen's tirade. The outcome was never in doubt. The synod, packed with Stephen's allies, found Formosus guilty on all counts. With the verdict declared, Stephen pronounced the sentence. Formosus's papacy was retroactively declared null and void. Every act, every decree, and every ordination he had ever performed was erased from history. But the desecration wasn't over. Stephen ordered his guards to seize the corpse. They tore the papal vestments from its decaying form. Then, they took a knife and sliced off the 3 fingers of Formosus's right hand, the very fingers a pope uses to bestow the sacred blessing. It was a final, visceral act of damnation. The mutilated corpse, now dressed in layman's rags, was dragged from the basilica and buried in a common grave. But even that wasn't enough. Shortly after, Stephen had the body dug up again, weighted it down, and had it hurled into the Tiber River, a final attempt to physically erase Formosus from the world. Section 4. The Aftermath and the Mob's Judgment. The Cadaver Synod didn't secure Stephen's power. It absolutely destroyed it. The spectacle of a dead pope being mutilated sent a shockwave of horror through Rome. The city's populace, who were no strangers to violence, were genuinely appalled by the sacrilegious theater. It was a step too far, a violation of the most fundamental respect for the dead. Public outrage boiled over and riots erupted throughout the city. The clergy were thrown into chaos. The synod's verdict meant that every priest and bishop ordained by Formosus was now, technically, no longer a priest or bishop. Their spiritual authority and their very identities had been declared invalid, creating widespread panic within the church. Adding to the public fury, rumors began to circulate that the corpse of Formosus had washed up on the riverbank and was performing miracles. The backlash was swift and merciless. The public anger that Stephen had unleashed turned squarely on him. United in their disgust, the Roman populace and clergy rose up against him. By August 897, just months after the trial, Stephen VI was overthrown, stripped of his papal authority, and thrown into a dungeon. His end was grimly poetic. He wasn't given a trial, not even a sham one. He was simply strangled to death in his cell, his brief, infamous reign ending in disgrace and violence. Section 5. The Unraveling and the Legacy of a Grudge. The death of Stephen VI didn't end the saga. It only began the messy process of cleaning it up. His successor, Pope Theodore II, reigned for only 20 days, but in that short time, he formally annulled the synod, rehabilitating Formosus. The next pope, John IX, went even further. He convened his own synod, which condemned Stephen's trial, ordered the records burned, and officially declared all of Formosus's ordinations valid. To prevent such a horror from happening again, John IX's synod passed a new law explicitly forbidding a corpse from ever being put on trial. For their part in the grotesque affair, 7 cardinals who had participated were excommunicated. But in the venomous political climate of 10th century Rome, nothing was ever truly settled. Years later, in 904, one of Formosus's most bitter enemies, Sergius III, became pope. Sergius, who had been a co-conspirator in the Cadaver Synod, immediately reversed the reversals. He reinstated the guilty verdict against Formosus, plunging the church back into chaos and proving just how deeply the factional hatred ran. This dizzying back and forth shows that the synod was never just about one man's madness. It was a symptom of a profoundly broken system, where the church's highest office was a weapon in an ongoing political war. Beyond the politics, the Cadaver Synod offers a chilling look into the medieval understanding of power and memory. By mutilating Formosus's body, Stephen was attempting a damnatio memoriae, a condemnation of memory. He sought to erase his rival, not just from the law books, but from history itself. It was a war against memory, revealing how political victory in this era seemed to require the complete annihilation of an opponent, both in life and in death. Ultimately, the Cadaver Synod stands as one of history's most visceral testaments to papal fallibility. While the doctrine of papal infallibility is a very specific one, this event proved that popes were men. They could be just as susceptible to jealousy, hatred, and unimaginable cruelty as any other ruler. Popes Stephen VI and Sergius III weaponized their spiritual authority for personal and political revenge, twisting the sacred machinery of the church into an instrument of desecration. The story of the Cadaver Synod is a journey into the heart of a dark age, where political ambition and personal vendetta converged in a gruesome public display. It was the moment the papacy's hunger for earthly power became so ravenous that it literally consumed its own dead. The image of a rotting corpse on a throne being screamed at by a living pope has echoed through history as a warning. It's a stark reminder that unchecked power, even in the holiest of institutions, can lead to the most profane of acts. It is a case study on how easily the quest for power can corrupt, how vengeance can blind, and how even sacred traditions can be sacrificed at the altar of a grudge. If you found this story about one of history's darkest chapters fascinating, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more stories you were never taught in school. And let us know in the comments, what other bizarre historical events should we uncover next?